Hey there, welcome to a tour of our edible gardens. We moved here 15 years ago and there's about 4 acres of property, and right from the beginning my focus was on growing food, either on trees or vegetables in the garden or on vines and bushes. One of the first trees we planted, well it's sort of a tree shrub, are these hazelnuts. They are usually loaded with nuts, but we never really get any because of the chipmunks and the red squirrels and the blue jays. And there's even evidence of their hungry habits. In addition to the hazelnuts, we planted heart nuts or Persian walnuts, and there's 3 trees here that were meant to be semi-dwarf, but in 10 years they've grown quite a lot. They don't have any nuts on them this year, and some years they're just loaded. I think maybe our late cold spring and it snowed in May might have had something to do with it, but there does seem to be a cycle of heavy production to not as much production. To go along this way, we did have high bush cranberries planted here, but when they were planted there was nothing else and they had full sun. And then when these walnuts grew up, they were too shaded and they weren't happy, and then they got a bunch of beetles, I think because the plants were stressed. So they've been removed and will be replaced by something else. Something else we have a lot of around here are rain catchment. So we've got, it's not pretty and I'm working on a way to make it look better, but there's we have 3 1,000 liter totes that we use for irrigation because we're on a well, and I think the rainwater is better anyways, and I don't want to use the well water. We keep walking this way. There's a white mulberry tree, and again the robins love the white mulberries more than anybody else, or at least they don't let us have any. Keep walking this way. You can see our high tunnel, the polytunnel, which is in summer mode right now. But in front of it, there's, on this hill, there's pumpkins planted, and there's 2 crab apple trees that are full of fruit right now. And there's a hazelnut, but it's sort of buried underneath the pumpkin vines. I've planted 6 different varieties of pumpkin and winter squash this year, and this is Long Island cheese. They're not maturing, but they will be a quite flat, very round, very pale orange pumpkin. And in amongst that are Dolgo crab apples. They're edible crab apples, and it's a Russian variety. They're very hardy, very disease resistant. This is a 20-foot by 48-foot long high tunnel, polytunnel. And it is primarily used for winter growing vegetables. In the summer, however, I grow cucumbers and cabbages, things that would be attacked by pests. So actually just inside, before we go inside, there's a little bay tree in a pot and culinary ginger. There's a Christmas tree lettuce here. It's not really, it's just gone to seed. Okay, come on in. So right now we're in a sort of an in-between phase in the greenhouse. This bed is going to be planted with some arugula and lettuce greens and things. Right now there's lettuce, it's going to seed, but the chickens will get that, and there's some arugula. And here there's a strawberry bed, and these are ever-bearing strawberries, which actually I think they need to get picked again. They've been producing all summer. And it's been great because usually we get 0 strawberries because the chipmunks eat them all in the garden. There's cabbage and kale, a bed of parsley and sage, and some calendula flowers from last year, some lettuce that goes to seed. I saved the seeds. There's this bed was filled with coriander or cilantro and kale, different vegetables, which is, it's also going to get planted up. Something I do is I usually plant up carrots usually the beginning of August, so then I can harvest them until Christmas. But usually they're very small. This year I started them in July, and I think we'll get more sizable carrots earlier, because once the sunlight hours reduce, you don't get a lot of growth on your vegetables. There's also basil. This bed is parsnips. This is an experiment. I've never grown parsnips before. But they were started early May, and we will harvest them after the freeze, so in the winter, maybe even in the spring next year. There's another bed here that had potatoes in the spring. Over winter it had Swiss chard, and it's getting ready for more greens. Another bed of carrots. There's 3 different varieties of carrots we're growing this year, just to try them out. And then cucumbers, which I forgot to harvest. I'm just going to grab a few before I forget. These are green fingers or Persian cucumbers, and they shouldn't get this big. This size is pretty good, but they still taste great when they're big. And I planted alyssum underneath it just because it's pretty and it smells nice. Another bed of carrots, because we like carrots so much. And I've got fig trees in here. These I overwinter in our basement, and they are covered with fruit. There's also a rosemary plant, and this spring in April we decided to grow lemon trees from seeds from lemons we had, and these are all the little lemon trees that have been potted up, and maybe in 4 or 5 years we'll get some lemons. The vegetable garden, I grow garlic and storage onions, and the onions are curing. The garlic's finished curing. I just have to clean it up and take it inside. This is a random radish plant that was just turfed here with a bunch of seedlings, and in case you didn't know, you can pick these pods. If you let them go to flower, they make these pods and they are delicious. Another way to eat radish. This whole area used to be a goat pasture. We used to have milking goats, and now it's been turned into a mix of ornamental gardens and fruit trees, and it used to encompass the whole area that had the greenhouse, and there's other areas to the east of the greenhouse. The future vision for this area includes a fruit orchard, possibly an organic sort of pond for wildlife and beauty, and maybe some food forests incorporated with guilds of trees with the 7 layers of edibles. But for now, we're just enjoying it. It's a work in progress. Over the years, we've planted many fruit trees. This is a Mutsu apple, but we've planted Portlands and Macintosh. There's lots of different pears, and I will show you the mulberries and other things. But weird things have happened to them. There was a microburst that just picked up one of our apple trees and threw it 50 feet, so it was a goner. But this tree has been amazing, and it's hopefully gonna last a while. It's starting to lean over, so we might have to brace it up a bit. Just outside our front door, we have an herb spiral with mint and chives and sage, and there's asparagus growing in there. There was oregano. I think it's mint now. Right across from this is actually kiwi. There's a kiwi climber growing up. More edibles. In our main garden in front of the house, this used to be a vegetable garden. There used to be corn and sunflowers, and then we planted, there was sweet cherries, sour cherries, and we've had some not successful situations, but right now the edibles are mostly herbs. There's lavender and culinary thyme and creeping thyme, so ornamental thymes. There's also kiwis growing on the arch. And of course, flowers like daylilies, they're edible as well. We don't eat them, but there's a lot of, even hostas you can eat and dahlias, but I would research the varieties and make sure you've got the culinary ones. This is an Asian pear tree, or an apple pear, if you want to call it that. They're round, they look like apples, but they're pears. We've had 3 different varieties, and this is the one that's been most successful. Behind it there's a little sour cherry. I think it's a couple years old. And behind the sour cherry there's a mulberry tree. The birds and chipmunks really like this tree too, but we do get a lot of fruit off this one. And I must say, mulberries have to be the most tasty fruit we grow around here. There are some blueberry shrubs around. There's actually a blueberry right here, which I should probably pick quick before the birds find it. These used to be in full sun, but of course all the trees in this attempted food forest are shading them now. Over here, we're approaching the west side of the vegetable garden, which is surrounded by grapevines to sort of buffer the winds and also give it that more little secret garden, intimate feel. There's beds of rhubarb along the front, and I guess we can go around. Jordan will go from the other end. The raising food strategy also incorporated animals. We had chocolate muscovy ducks that we were going to breed, but we ended up with 3 boys, so that never really happened. But right here behind me is our duck coop where they used to live, and it became a brooder coop where if we had a broody hen, she could raise her chicks there. In this run there's a serviceberry, which are also a fruit producing tree. The cedar waxwings get them before we do, but it's still it's a food plant. Along the east edge of this run here, or the coop, is perennial beds of asparagus. So we do get a lot of asparagus in the spring, and it's been here for 4 years or so, and it just keeps getting better. This is the south view of our garden from the south. There's calendula in a pot, and this is a whole bed of sweet potatoes. There's also more pumpkins over there. And then that garden is newer this year. It was expanded. It is going to end up being cutting gardens. Along the south edge too, there's haskaps and blueberries. And then there's some more mature haskaps at the edge. If we go into the garden, we've got lima beans growing up to the sky. There's a bed with daikon radish and alyssum. There's Florence fennel and bulb fennel, and it's going to flower, and it is beautiful. It's so tall and attracts pollinators. There's just bees all over it. There's more lima beans. These are supposed to be bush limas, but they turned into climbing limas. And beside that, there's sweet peas. Sweet peas and asparagus. Asparagus has seeded itself everywhere. And then there's blackberries. These are thornless blackberries. And you can see, oh, come look at this one. These are enormous. These are wonderful. And they spread everywhere, which I like because more fruit. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at all the ones that are coming. You can also see that there's borage that has self-seeded all over the garden, and I let it because the bumblebees like it. And the flowers are edible. Behind this, we've got a bed of strawberries, which is why we transplanted into the greenhouse because the chipmunks ate them all the time. There's black raspberries in here now, and dill that self-seeds everywhere. And beyond this bed is Jordan's daylily propagation zone where her babies from the hybridization projects live. There's more borage. And this bed here is also full of blackberries, with more coming, lots more coming, big berries. And then there's black currants, which I think of the fruit shrub bushes, the black currants are my favorite. They're so prolific, the birds and chipmunks don't seem to eat them, and they make fabulous things like jam, and I'm making cassis right now. And behind the black currants is a jostaberry, which is a cross between, I think, a black currant and a gooseberry. We have zucchini, which are suffering from the excessive heat and drought, even though they get watered with rainwater all the time that we store from our totes. Beyond that, there's beets and another bed of fennel. I had all the garlic here, and I did a cover crop of buckwheat, which is finished now. And then tomatoes. Lots of tomatoes. These are a really good one. These are yellow brandywines. Very prolific, good sized tomato, delicious. They don't get blossom end rot. The plants are generally lovely and healthy looking. Of course, they're getting a bit tired. It's the end of August. Behind the tomatoes this was a bed of peas that then became a bed of runner beans. There's scarlet runner beans and purple pole beans. And behind that, another bed of tomatoes that are looking rather tired. These are Greitmeyer's Pride, which are really great tasting ox heart tomato. There's a ripe one here. So the plants they grow on are very spindly looking, and the leaves are kind of droopy, but this is how they grow. And there's an example of a tomato. They're low acid, very meaty, delicious tasting tomato. And over here, this is where the storage onions that are curing in the greenhouse came out of. And then our purple pole beans with a rovilism in front, which was a really nice touch this year. I've never grown flowers like that mixed in the beds with the annual vegetables. Just pretty, they smell wonderful. And of course some zinnias just to bring up some color. If you look above the beans, there's sorghum. I grew broom corn this year, hoping to eventually grow enough that I can make some brooms. And also behind those, there's haskap bushes and then pears, Bartlett pears. And the whole garden is surrounded by seedless grapes. This arch is beside the garden, right across from the grapes, and it's covered with, this is a female hardy Arctic kiwi, and on the other side of the arch is the male hardy Arctic kiwi, and they are wonderful plants. They're food producing, the blossoms smell so delicious, and the leaves on the male kiwi are variegated with pink and white. They're a beautiful vine plant. You could grow them as ornamentals if you didn't want just food plants. But they've been a wonderful addition. Beside them is another serviceberry or Saskatoon berry, and then more seedless grapes. Inside the chicken run, we have chickens for eggs. We have laying hens. There's chums, which are a cross between a cherry plum and wild raspberries, wild black raspberries, and wild blackberries in there. There's, I guess, wild edibles all over the place around here if you're willing to look for them. And I just sorry, I don't know what to... Even though my focus from the outset was to grow food, I am so glad that ornamental plants have been added into our gardens in the last 5 or so years. It brings in beauty and pollinators and so much more pleasure when you're working with all the perennial foods and the annual foods. It's been so much fun gardening here, and thank you for coming on this tour.